I'm Bruce Fummey. A viewer asked me to talk about how Robert the Bruce finally won Scotland's independence. So I've brought you to Bannockburn, because this is where it happened, right? What if Scotland's independence was won in a French boudoir in Paris?
You're not going.
I'd need a bigger budget. Here at the Rotunda at Bannockburn, we commemorate our great warrior king, Robert the Bruce, who gained Scottish independence after English invasion. Now, this isn't exactly where it happened, but events took place in and around here over 2 days to decide who would occupy Stirling Castle. And that's when Scotland gained its independence in June 1314, right? If only it were so simple. Edward II, the King of England, fled Bannockburn, being ignominiously pursued all the way to Dunbar by Sir James Douglas. From then on, Sir James led numerous raids into the cowed English north, earning himself the sobriquet of the Black Douglas, that side of the border. Folks would sing their children to sleep with lullabies, promising that the Black Douglas wouldn't come to harm them that night. No wonder parts of the north of England are still a wee bit racist, eh? Yeah. But winning the battle, seizing control, running your own affairs wasn't independence. For that to be official, they needed Edward II to accept defeat. More importantly, they needed the blessing of the Pope. Now, when I talk about Scotland and England, I talk about it as if each were a single, homogeneous, unified whole, with everyone in the same mind and pulling together in the same direction. And of course, they weren't. It wasn't like it is today. You had Scots who wanted independence from England. You had Scots in England who were happy with English overlordship. You had Scots in Scotland who were happy with English overlordship. There were even those who hated Robert the Bruce in spite of all that he'd achieved. Some complained that he'd confiscated their lands. Others said that he'd murdered a competitor on holy ground. Some said that he bore a striking similarity to a cross-dressing schoolboy in a comedy double act. Some say that Americans won't get that joke, even with subtitles. Of course, there would have been English who couldn't care less whether their own masters and overlords were Scotland's masters and overlords as well. You would also have had English who distrusted their own government enough to support Scotland's quest for independence. The point is, it was nothing like today. When I say Scotland and England, it's just a convenient oversimplification. So Robert the Bruce had won militarily, at least in the short term. But that doesn't mean that Edward II was prepared to give up his claim to own Scotland. Eventually, Robert the Bruce must have realised that no amount of harry in the north of England was going to bring Scotland's freedom. 6 years after Bannockburn, nothing had changed. And that's when the Scots wrote to the Pope in the Declaration of Arbroath. His acknowledgement of Scotland's independent existence was crucial. Now, people bang on about the high-flown rhetoric of the Declaration of Arbroath, the eloquent prose, the impact on the wider world, the blah-de-blah-de-blah, and it is all that. But the Declaration of Arbroath was also a recognition and acceptance that winning the war wasn't enough. There was a peace to be won with diplomacy. And Bruce's progeny would never be at peace without a stable future relationship with England. Help came from an unlikely source. Did you watch Braveheart? In it, Edward II's Queen Isabella was sent to negotiate with William Wallace. Suddenly, she realises he's not a savage. They fall in love and have a bit of nookie. And was her pregnancy really down to her homosexual husband? Or was William Wallace truly the father of future Plantagenet kings? And was it all bollocks to introduce a love interest? And if it had happened, then Isabella was only 2 years old at the Battle of Stirling Bridge, and even Mel Gibson has his limits. What's more, William Wallace was hung, drawn and quartered in 1305. Isabella's son, Edward III, wasn't born until 1312. That means for 7 years, somebody's been running around with William Wallace's sperm in a bucket. Actually, I have heard tell that the reason that they built the Wallace monument was to have some place to store the bucket. In fact, hidden in all Braveheart's Hollywood storyline structure, there is a tiny grain of truth. The Wallace's bucket bit I made up. But Queen Isabella, the wife of Edward II, probably did have an affair with a rebellious knight. Queen Isabella did negotiate with the Scots, and Queen Isabella did give us more than her Plantagenet husband, his father or his son would have. Let me tell you the story. Incidentally, if you're interested in the people, places and events in Scottish history, then why not subscribe to my channel by hitting the red button at the bottom right of the screen. To support the channel, you can click the white tab up there to become a member, or buy me a coffee with a link in the description below. Anyway, let me tell you the story. One of the reasons for our success here at Bannockburn was that the English were divided against themselves. This was partly due to Piers Gaveston, Edward's favourite. Some might say lover, but that might be hearsay, but he did fly the rainbow banner, and his coat of arms was fleur-de-lis around a lion in leopard skin trousers standing in a glitter ball. But cliché isn't evidence. Now, if you're wondering why I'm talking over my shoulder to you like this, it's because you need to be able to do that to get a job as a presenter at the BBC, and this is like my demo tape for them.
You won't get a job with the BBC talking about Scottish independence.
I never really thought that through, did I? For whatever reason, Edward gave lands and titles to Gaveston. It created a situation that was pretty near to civil war. Even after Gaveston's extrajudicial execution by jealous barons, there was a constant internal strife in England. Factions seeking support from France, Isabella almost captured when our brave Sir Douglas tried to kidnap her, a wholesale invasion and humiliating rout by Robert the Bruce at the Battle of Bannockburn, Isabella being abandoned to capture by the Scots as Edward fled, more internal squabbles and Isabella heading off to France. And even then, Edward still thought that he could cling on to Scotland. They don't let go easily, you know. It wasn't enough to win the battlefield. Isabella, who never met, let alone had sex with William Wallace, was now in France, where she did meet and probably had sex with Roger Mortimer, one of the English nobles exiled in all those civil strife shenanigans, in a French boudoir in Paris.
You're still no going?
Long story short, Isabella returns to England with Mortimer and a mercenary army. They force Edward II to abdicate in favour of his son, Edward III. Edward II then mysteriously disappears, and during young Edward III's minority and her regency, Isabella negotiates a treaty with Robert the Bruce. Robert the Bruce and his heirs would rule Scotland. Robert the Bruce's son David would marry Isabella's daughter, Edward III's sister. The border would be that which pertained during the reign of Alexander III, and we would give England £100,000 in 1328. That was a huge amount of money. They were bought and sold for Scottish gold. The Treaty of Edinburgh Northampton was signed by Robert the Bruce in Edinburgh on the 17th of March 1328, and it was ratified by the English Parliament at Northampton on the 1st of May in 1328, 14 years after the Battle of Bannockburn. Robert the Bruce only survived another year, but in that final year, as he tried to put himself right with God, he could do so knowing that he'd put his country on a stable footing for the future. Even the Pope sent precious holy oil to anoint Scottish monarchs at their coronation as independent kings, although it arrived just too late for Robert the Bruce to see it himself. The white tab up there will take you to my video on the death of Robert the Bruce. It's one you'd really enjoy. But just before you do, one more thought. Robert the Bruce must have died thinking things were settled. He'd made a signed agreement with the English crown, parchment cut down the middle with a zigzag pattern so that each side's half could be matched without fear of underhand changes later. It was finally over. Or at the very least, it was a once-in-a-generation event. And yet they were back just 5 years later. And I've got a series of 3 videos to tell you what happened next. If you want a thoughtful tribute on the death of Robert the Bruce, for the story of the Second War of Scottish Independence, then click the link here. Hami and Dochus can be a lama alive. Cheerio and Rasta.